Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Disabilities with Laurie Peterson and Abby Weinstein. Laurie and Abby spend their days talking about dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and ADHD. They talk to parents of struggling students and adults who have had a lifetime of academic challenges. They want to share those stories along with their own insights with you. So, let's talk learning disabilities.
Welcome to episode 18. This is Laurie.
And this is Abby.
Today we are very excited. We have Beth McGaw here with Launchpad Consulting Group, and she is going to tell us all about her job as an independent educational consultant. Hi, Beth. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So I think maybe first tell me a little bit about what an educational consultant does, and then I want to know a little bit about how you landed in this space.
Okay. Well, an independent educational consultant works to help families and students in particular find that next best fit in the post-secondary world, so after high school.
Okay.
So it could be college, 4-year college, 2-year college, trade school. Some consultants specialize just in 4-year colleges and very select colleges.
Oh, really?
Others specialize in, say, learning disabilities, and then there's others that just do everything that comes to them. Yeah.
So do you have a specialty area?
My specialty is learning disabilities, ADHD, and spectrum.
And so tell us how you landed there. What brought you to that place?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I'll try and keep it short, but I actually started out as an engineer.
Oh.
I graduated as an engineer and worked in that field for a while, and then I started a family and did quit work after that because we moved around a lot. My husband's job helped us move around a lot, and so then I had my third son, and he was diagnosed with some developmental delays at an early age, 6 months, but then as he went into the school setting, he was diagnosed with learning disabilities and ADHD, mainly auditory processing and language processing disorders. So I had to find a way to help him. We went to the public schools that were very good where we were, but it got to a point in third grade that I had to find other therapies outside of school because the school system wasn't reacting fast enough. And they had a large caseload.
Right.
So that's when I started investigating more types of therapies for him. And while I was doing that, I said, I need to help other parents while I'm doing this. I mean, I'm gathering all this information.
Right.
I need to share it. So I actually started a publication.
Wow.
In Atlanta is where we lived at that time. It was called Kids Enabled, and
Great idea.
Yeah,
Idea.
It was a great resource, and I loved the publication industry. It was so much fun creating this magazine, and then it became a nonprofit. But then we moved to Dallas. So it got a little difficult to do the magazine back in, in Atlanta. So I got very involved in the Learning Disabilities Association of America. A lot of volunteer work for them. And eventually I became the president of the organization.
Wow.
And so I did that from 2018 to 2020. And so the last year I have been taking a break, and I decided I'm going to go back and dive a little deeper into the college admissions process. And so I just finished up my coursework for college admissions counseling from UC Riverside.
That's
and so
great.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I learned a lot more than I did before. But this is all to say that it was through my son, my youngest son, and that's the way it happens for a lot of parents.
Yes.
We have kids who have issues, and then we want to help other parents who have kids with issues. And so I decided I had to go through that search with my son as well. Proud to say that he has graduated from college. It took him a little longer than most. He had to hop around a little bit, but I learned a lot from that experience, and so did he. But he graduated and he's now working. So I guess I can say it worked. And
Was he your first client?
he was my first client. Yes, and I have helped quite a few of his friends and their families along the way. And now, have other clients of my own. I don't work just in Dallas. Now that we can work virtually, I have a client in Massachusetts, so we can do it anywhere on Zoom.
Isn't that the best?
You sound like you're a great resource for parents and for students with a lot of experience and knowledge.
Right.
That's exciting.
So, who would you say your target client is then? Like, who is your perfect client?
Well, my perfect client would be, there's really no perfect client because
Right.
all students are different, right?
Right.
I mean, so, and everybody learns differently, whether they have diagnosed learning disabilities or not.
True.
So I would say it would be a student who's motivated to do more after high school, that wants to pursue either a college degree or go to trade school. They have to be a willing participant in the process, and so that would be my ideal client. I can say that I don't always get that, and so I have to find ways to get them motivated, and then we work through the process, and then it happens.
Right.
But that would be my ideal client.
Right.
We sometimes even see adults that are wanting to go back to school, later in life that aren't necessarily just out of high school. So do you work with adults as well, or what all ages do you work with?
Sure, it's the same process. So ideally, it's good to catch students in, say, 8th grade going into 9th, because then you can start with that career assessment side. But normally, I work with students that are juniors through, until they get to college. I have worked with adults who are working through a career change. And we go through the same sort of process because we do career assessments, personality assessments, like a career interview, if you will, where we, kind of dive into their past and what they like to do. It's very important to look at their strengths.
Is that what you call the strength-based approach to coaching, is by looking at their strengths?
Yes, I do feel that's really important for everyone, especially for people who, for those who have any kind of like learning disability, ADHD, even on the spectrum. It's really important, I think, to look at the strengths, and not just strengths in particular, like I'm good at. It's their aptitudes, their interests. Those two go together. And by looking at your aptitudes and combining it with your interest, you can kind of determine what that path will be. And I use a career assessment called U-Science, and it does that. And it comes back with this wonderful report that lays out what the client or the student has, is all about. And it's really interesting to see the light turn on, after giving these assessments. Of course, personality assessments are good. I use one called 16 Personalities. It's a free assessment. Anybody can do that. And then, of course, there's Gallup strengths and Myers-Briggs and all of that, too. But
So I'm curious, if you start with a student going into 9th grade, at that level, what are you looking at? Because they're not really ready to make a career decision, or even maybe can they make a decision about what they want to major in at that age, or are you just trying to lay the groundwork, so to speak?
some kids know exactly what they want to do.
Right.
But most don't. So what you want to do is you do the career assessments. You find out, get them to know a little bit more about themselves. So you lay that groundwork, which then helps them determine what curriculum to take in high school.
Those elective courses that are going to build skills for their career.
Exactly. So for, say, a student who wants to study engineering, it's really important that they take the math classes and really AP classes along the way. It's amazing how many students out there how many AP classes they're taking now. And when I went to
I
school, we
know.
didn't really have that at my school. But it's very, very competitive. And if you want to go to a competitive school, then you need to have the AP classes. You need to have the right rigor. They call that rigor of curriculum, and be able to accomplish that in order to get into the right school.
So as far as helping them navigate the whole admissions process, it's going to rely on, I guess, several things. How do you help them get through that process of the applications and knowing what schools are going to be best for them?
Well, we talk a lot about what they want out of a college. Where do they want to be? The location. How big a school do they want to go to? They want to go to a big school with 25,000 students, or do they want to go to a smaller school with 1,000, or do they want to go, somewhere in between 6,000? That makes a big difference on the type of school that you're going to lead them to.
For kids with learning differences, do you help them seek out the schools that have better support services?
Well, I try to.
Yeah.
Some families aren't quite as receptive to that because learning disabilities do not go away after you leave high school.
Right.
It's a lifelong, quote, disability, and really people don't like the term disability, but we kind of have to say it in order to get the services. So yes, I do try and guide them to the schools that have the right services, and all colleges are required to have disability support services. They're required to have that by law. So when you're in high school, if you have a diagnosed learning disability, then you're going to have an IEP or a 504. That you don't have that in college. You are now covered under ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now you can use the information from the IEP and the 504 to get accommodations, because that is normally based on an evaluation and documentation, which you guys do.
Exactly.
And so you need that in order to get those accommodations. But once you're in a university, you go to Disability Support Services. Now from there, it's up to the student to make sure they get the accommodations that they need. And that's where sometimes
they're no longer organizing
Yes.
an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting for you.
Right. That's where sometimes the ball drops, and they don't have the executive functioning skills. They're not developed yet. Normally that happens 25, 26, 27. So they need those supports in place in order to be able to get the services that they need.
So many of those kids, though, haven't been taught how to advocate for themselves. Because the meetings have always been scheduled for them, or mom's always called, or dad, to get things, when they're not receiving the right accommodations, someone's chasing that down. So do you work with those students, those younger students, on how to start laying that groundwork of, advocating and knowing when it's okay to ask for help?
Sure, I'd say the earlier the better. I think I'm a firm believer that student needs to know what their learning disabilities or what their issues are. The diagnostician or the parents maybe sit down with the diagnostician and decide at what age, depends on the age and what they can process, but to teach them kind of what they have and how to navigate that, how to ask for the accommodations that they need. So the earlier the better, but if they haven't, then it is good. I will sit down, or I will ask if we can talk about that, because it's so important for these students to know this information before they get to college and accept it.
Right. Is what it is.
Yeah, so there are different levels of support in colleges. There's the regular disability support services. You go to XYZ University, and that's all they offer. That means that you have to be a very proactive student, and you have to know yourself.
And at that level, some of the most common accommodations that they're getting are what?
They're getting possibly Well, most campuses do have tutoring and a writing center and possibly a math center
For everybody.
for everyone.
Right.
And that's normally peer tutoring.
Mhm.
And then from there, the student needs to know, how to get themselves out of bed,
Yes.
How
to
get
go to
on
class,
time.
where to find the information on the syllabus. I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of organizational information that they need to go into college understanding. And the neurotypical student may not always know that, but they can catch on pretty quickly
Right.
because our LD students, ADHD students, and students on the spectrum have another level of support that they need. Sometimes it's overwhelming and they crash. So then they need that next level.
So at the most basic level, that's where they're getting things like extra time on their tests, or really just is that kind of where you're thinking is
Yeah.
and then the next level would be more like
And they could
one-on-one,
have a quiet, distraction-free testing room,
copies of notes.
copies of notes, although sometimes that's
Hard. Yeah.
But if you go to the next level, then they have academic mentoring. So they have some mentoring programs. A lot of colleges are starting to offer these mentoring programs.
Just through disability services or for everybody?
It's through mainly. Well, it probably depends on the
Depends on school,
university.
yeah.
I think it could be for anybody. Some of them offer them for every student,
Wow.
but they're smaller universities. So you have to do your research, is what I'm saying. Then the next level is those comprehensive services, where it's a fee-based program, and you meet with a coordinator either daily or 3 days a week, and they look at your syllabuses for all your classes, make sure you have all your tests scheduled.
Wow.
You go to see them when you need to take a test. They help you determine. They may even help you with meeting a professor. And normally these coordinators have very good relationships with professors on campus, and that's another very important thing to look at is how are the faculty friendly to students with learning disabilities or ADHD or anybody who needs support. That's a very important piece of all that. Well, sometimes it's through trial and error.
Sure.
But it's asking. You have to, you do your research. You meet with other students that go to that school. Once I have a student who wants to commit to, several schools, they have interest, they're interested in, then I might try and reach out to other students that go to those schools and say, what is it like? How do you do it? Is the faculty friendly to the support?
Is it easy to get your supports?
Yeah.
So I have a question. So you've got a student that's getting that level of support where they're meeting with someone 3 times a week, and they're really, it sounds amazing, but at the same time, do they try to get that student through those 4 to 5 years to become more and more independent and try to pull some of that away? I just think about when you finish school and you've had that level of support, then are you really ready to go out
in the real world?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Do they fade out that support? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is the goal. The goal is to fade it out. Most students can do it, some can't.
Sure.
I will tell you that I do know students that have needed it through senior year, and it wasn't until the last semester that actually was pulled back.
Right.
But they made it through, and that was the goal. And these students were very aware of their needs, so that was that was an accomplishment. But they had a little bit more academic needs,
Sure.
So that's why they had to meet with the coordinator, more often.
So not every school offers all those levels of support, right?
Right.
Every school has to offer some level of support. Some go above and beyond. Off the top of your head, like the top 4 or 5 schools that you feel like go above and beyond, what would those be?
Well, there are some LD only schools that I know of, Landmark College in Vermont, Beacon College in Florida. Those are two off the top of my head that are only LD, ADHD, disability only schools. And then there are other schools that have comprehensive programs. My son went to the University of the Ozarks that has the Jones Learning Center. That was the reason why he graduated from college.
That's awesome.
But there are others. There's University of Denver has a program there, and there's some in the Northeast, Curry College, Dean College, Mitchell College. There's Marshall. I mean, there's quite a few of them around you, but and I have many of them listed on my website.
Okay, good. We'll put that in the show notes so people can access that. Is that the same level that you would see? Because I know like Texas Tech has a really good disability program.
Yes.
Do they have? Is that same level, kind of as their top tier?
Yes, Texas Tech has a great program too. Abilene Christian and Shriner.
Oh, really?
Those are the three here in Texas.
I know about Abilene Christian. That's good to know.
Yeah, and Shriner. Shriner is a great LD program.
Where is that? Why don't I know?
Kerrville.
Okay.
And I'm
Learning something.
promoting that because I just visited them in March.
Oh, yeah?
And it's a great little campus.
Okay.
Does the University of Arizona still have they had the SALT program, which was for...
Another great program. Now that's a very large school.
It is a large
So
school.
a student would need to be able to navigate that large university setting. But the SALT Center is an excellent program if your student can handle the large university.
Do you have to be accepted into these programs at these schools, or is it just if you get accepted to the school, then you're into the program?
Yeah, so normally you need to get accepted into the school first,
Okay.
and then I don't know if it's accepted is the word, but you go through their process to get the accommodations through them.
Gotcha.
So like showing documentation of a diagnosed learning disability, applying for support services and accommodations.
Yes, and many of these centers help you through that disability support services process.
Oh, really?
So that's another service that they offer.
Oh, that's nice. So I have a lot of parents that will ask, I'm not sure if you've heard this, Abby, that they're afraid by, if one, they're applying to colleges, if the college knows in the application process that they might have a learning disability, that might hinder their acceptance. Can you speak to that? I don't think it's true, but I guess you would know more than me, so please, can you kind of answer that?
Well, that's a tricky question because they don't really need to know that you have a learning disability when you apply.
There's nowhere that you have to check a box or anything. Yeah, that's what I thought.
You don't. What you're doing is you're giving your basic information, you're completing your essays like everybody else, you're providing your SAT, ACT scores if it's a school that accepts them. Many schools are doing test optional now.
Right.
Some are going test blind, meaning they won't look at them at all. Which has really turned the admissions process upside down this past year.
Oh, my sure.
That's another podcast.
Right.
But no, you don't need to say it. But a lot of times, that may be something you want to point out in the essay.
Right.
How you've had these challenges and how you've overcome them. Rather than just saying I have a learning disability. I might have a learning disability, but I have become a better person because of it. And of course, they're going to look at your transcripts, so they're going to be basing their admission on more of that.
Your performance in high school.
Performance and your rigor in high school than whether you have a learning disability.
So is that part of your coaching with your students throughout high school and navigating the admission process? Do you help them with those essays and the applications? Is that something that's part of your services?
Yes, I help them complete their applications, and then we work on the essays that go with the application, because there are different ways to apply to college. You can do the Common App, you can do Apply Texas, some of these universities have their own application, and so they'll have their own essay. So each of these applications come with essay prompts, and so I help the student choose the prompt that they want to speak to, and then we work on the essay. Yes.
That's great.
And once those kids get to college, I think we kind of touched on this, but just because I think this is such an important point too, that those services are only there if they take advantage of them. No one's going to come chasing them down and say, hey, don't forget, you get to take your test in here today. You know, you got to show up for it.
Well, that's where that self-advocacy
Self-advocacy.
part comes in, and so that's why we need to try and help our kids learn those skills before they get to school. So, setting that alarm clock, getting themselves up out of bed by themselves in high school. If they don't have those skills, then I'm worried.
Yeah.
Let's just say their first year is going to be a lot more difficult. So that's where you might want to think about some other options.
Right. So, we've talked a lot about college admissions, but a couple things I want to make sure we touch on are, I want to talk a little bit about a gap year, and then also what the options are for kiddos that maybe college isn't a good fit for them. So, first, what's a gap year? How would you define it?
Well, the gap year is just taking time off to explore who you are. I would say that there are lots of kids who take gap years. I mean, even like Harvard University, sometimes they look favorably on kids who take gap years. Those kids are going to go abroad, or they're going to be doing internships or something along that line.
So taking a year to just lay home and play Xbox all
That is not a gap year.
It's not a gap year.
No.
Okay, just to clarify.
A gap year is improving yourself in some form or fashion. So, like I've known students who have, like I said, gone abroad, and they have done mission work, or volunteered, or even just studied another language, and then have come back and either started, it could be even just a gap semester, and start in January, or they start the next year. A gap year for an LD, ADHD, autism spectrum kid might be a little different. That gap year could be a special program that's going to help that student with their social emotional learning. It's going to help them with their independent skills, living skills, their time management skills, and for several students that I have worked with, I have offered that as an option, and it has been a good thing.
And that's good to know that schools don't look down or look unfavorably against students that have taken that gap year.
I mean,
That's great.
you can apply to college and get in, and then take a gap year. So you can get in and say, you know what, I'm going to defer for a year, and then take that gap year. But others really need to take the gap year before they decide what they're going to do afterwards.
Right.
So there are some really good ones out there. You could look under the Gap Year, I think it's called the Gap Year Association.
Just association?
There's an association.
That's awesome.
Can I take a gap year from work?
Really, let's do that. I think a gap year sounds
From
really
life.
good right now. We'll improve ourselves.
I want
Not
to
a
go
spa.
improve myself.
That's called a vacation.
Oh, yeah, but not for a year.
That's true. So the Gap Year Association, you said?
Yeah, gapyearassociation.org, and so you can go on there and you can look at all the various options.
And they have some specific for kids with learning differences, or
They have those too.
That's awesome.
I know of a few as well. The CLE, College Living Experience, has various locations. They do have one in Austin. We're here in Texas, so they have one in Austin, Denver. I think they have California, DC. I think they have one in Florida. But you can look on their site, CLE. And then there's CIP, which is College Internship Program, same type of thing. And then there's another one that's really good for kids who with ADHD and on the spectrum called SOAR. And they're an experiential type of gap year where you go to Wyoming, and they do a lot of outdoor type of activities, but they also have internships within the little town there.
that's awesome.
I mean, I went and visited, and they had some pretty unique internships, like, fish hatchery and
Okay, that's pretty cool. Though.
tannery.
Yeah.
This is a small town in
That is
Wyoming.
cool. Right.
But they also help their kids with those independent living skills, and they do, I think, at least once, if not twice a year. They put their kids in a van, and they have to go on a trip themselves, and they have to plan this trip themselves, and they have to visit colleges along
That's
the way.
awesome.
So it's also a great
What a
program.
great
But
experience.
there are other ones out there too.
SOAR.
We'll put those in the show notes for
Okay.
everybody.
Yeah, SOAR.
So then, if you've got a kiddo that just college is not going to, for whatever reason, there's lots of reasons, college isn't going to be a good fit. How do you navigate that process for them?
Well, in that case, then it's probably a good time to think about work,
Career.
and at least for a year or two, and try out various various experiences. We still want to play to their strengths. We
Mhm.
still want to get a job that's going to play to their strengths, and hopefully through that experience they will figure out what the next step is for them. Because it could be they could take a class or two at the community college. They could take a like a credential type
Like a certification.
program,
Mhm.
certification. Because there's always trade schools,
Right.
welding, and then there's cosmetology, and there's a lot of programs out there, veterinary,
Right.
assistants that you can go towards. I encourage some type of post-secondary education because research shows that you will have higher salaries if you have some type of education.
Something. Some certification, some kind
Yeah.
of something, yeah.
So
That
the
makes sense.
higher up in the more education you have, the higher your salary. I'm not saying that everybody who has a college degree is going to be out getting a high salary out the gate,
Mhm.
but they have to work for it. And actually, right now in this employment environment that we have, our kids are having a hard time getting out
Really?
of college and finding jobs that make enough money to support themselves. But they just need to be resilient and just getting that experience, and then they'll start moving up.
Do you have some kids that show up and they're not sure which route they want to go? They don't know. They just know they've got to do something. They're going to graduate, right? Something's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
And so, do the inventories help you make those decisions? Is it just kind of talking it through, giving them their options, and letting them kind of marinate in that and make a decision? I think that would be very hard to do when you've got parents that maybe have these expectations. A student only has expectations over here. How do you marry those and make everybody happy, which I know is really impossible. But
Yeah, it can be very stressful for the student, for the parents. It's a stressful time.
do you find that you do a little counseling in there?
Yes, definitely. I think it's all about finding who you are. That student needs to find a little bit more, or think a little bit more about who they are and what they want to do
What they
in
want
life.
out of life.
What are their short-term goals? What are their long-term goals? Many students in that environment want to be entrepreneurs, which is fine, but you need some type of education to be successful in that, or you need some mentors.
Right.
So we look for mentors that can help guide them.
So that's nice.
That's great. Yeah.
What when you're working, are you mostly working with the student or a combo student parent? Like, how does it?
I work mainly with the student, but I keep the parent informed.
Okay.
Some cases I work both with the student and the parent. It really depends on the student. There's some students that say, "Mom, leave," and then there's some students that Mom's sitting next to them, and it's okay.
Right.
Whatever the student feels comfortable. I'm working with the student. That's my client. The parent is also my client because they have another part of the process,
Right.
that is, paying the bill.
Right.
But so they need to have some say in this too. But in the end, the student needs to be the one to decide what they want to do with their lives.
Sure.
Can you help with scholarship opportunities?
Yes, and financial aid, yes.
And are there some specific for kids with learning disabilities?
There are, but not as much as we would like.
Yeah.
I would love to see more scholarship opportunities for kids with learning disabilities. Sometimes we can get some through the university, but the first thing you need to do though is fill out the FAFSA. That's done October 1st, and that's a process. So
Yeah.
I can help the parents complete that FAFSA, FASA.org. And that's another thing that we need that we look at when we're looking at colleges. And not only is it what the student wants and location and in their majors and all of that, it's also how much is this going to cost?
Budget.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's a
so
big
the
one.
parents need to be involved in that. And there's something called a net price calculator that they can go on and kind of get a feel for how much aid they're going to get. And then there's also merit aid that you can get from specific colleges. But
Are you doing everything virtually, or are you doing any in-person meetings, or a little bit of both?
right now it's all virtual. But as everybody gets vaccinated, I'm comfortable, since I am vaccinated, I'm comfortable doing in person as well.
But you're working with kids across the country, so at that point then it's obviously.
It doesn't,
it's
because we're
virtual.
doing Zoom. They're used to doing Zoom.
Mhm.
I meet their pets and
Siblings.
yeah. And see what their room looks like. And then kind of gives me an idea of who they are.
Yeah,
So in
sure.
that way, it's actually very helpful to me as a consultant.
Yeah.
So how would somebody find you and reach you if they were interested in your services?
Well, they can email me at bethmcgaw@gmail.com, or they can call me 404-401-9400, and I'm sure you'll have that. Or they
We'll
can
have all
look
that in the show notes.
on my website, which is launchpadconsultinggroup.com, and I have a you can fill out a contact form.
Awesome.
Great.
That is awesome. Well, thank you.
That
This
is
has been really helpful. I know we get lots of questions
Absolutely.
about how to navigate this process once kids graduate in high school, and
We do.
especially for kids with learning differences or learning challenges, it can be anxiety inducing to start thinking about that. So to know that you've got the resources.
It is overwhelming
expertise.
to the parents and to the students.
Absolutely.
It is overwhelming.
Yeah, well, thank you for what you guys do too, because you are that first step.
Well,
We gotta have a diagnosis before we can do
Right, no,
anything.
you're exactly right.
And before they can get those accommodations, you have to have that diagnosis. So
Right.
I'm glad you're here to do that for them.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for
Thank
being
you
here.
for being
We'll
here.
have everything in the show notes. Remember, if you guys have any specific questions, you can always reach us at letstalklearningdisabilities@gmail.com. Or if you have suggestions about future episodes, stuff you'd like to hear. We are very thankful that you're here today. You guys, everybody have a great day, and stay tuned for our next episode, which will be episode 19 out in about 2 weeks. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. In our show notes, you can find information about today's talk, as well as links to resources and other episodes. If you have questions about today's talk, have ideas for future episodes, or just want to stay connected, you can contact us through Diagnostic Learning Services on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So, let's keep talking learning disabilities. This podcast is sponsored by eDiagnostic Learning. You can find more information at www.ediagnosticlearning.com.